Διεθνούς Κοινωνικού Συνεδρίου εκφράσει σχόλεων στο Βυζάντιο και την αναγέννηση, η ιδανική πόλη και η πρόσληψή της, που διοργανώνει το Ελληνικό Ινστιτούτο Βυζαντινών και Μεταβυζαντινών Σπουδών στη Βενετία. Θα μου επιτρέψετε να ευχαριστήσω και εγώ ιδιαίτερα τον πρόεδρο του Ελληνικού Ινστιτούτου, τον συνάδελφο κύριο Βασίλη Κουτουσά, για την πρόσκλησή του να συμμετάσχω σε αυτό το πραγματικά πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρον συνέδριο, όπως άλλωστε διαφάνηκε και από την εναρτήρια χθεσινή πρώτη συνεδρία και από την εισηγητική ομιλία της καθηγήτριας κυρίας Γραμματικής Κάρου. Στην δεύτερη αυτή συνεδρία έχουμε 4 διακεκριμένους ομιλητές που θα μας αναπτύξουν ο καθένας κάποιο θέμα της επιστημονικής του ειδίκευσης και ερευνητικής εξειδίκευσης. Έχουμε την μεγάλη χαρά να συμμετέχουν στο παρόν συνέδριο οι εκλεκτοί συνάδελφοι του Ινστιτούτου Βυζαντινών, Νεοελληνικών και Κυπριακών Σπουδών του Πανεπιστημίου της Γρανάδα, υπό τον καθηγητή κύριο Μαρτίνez, και θα παρουσιάσουν κάποια εξαιρετικά ενδιαφέροντα θέματα σε αυτή την συνεδρία. Θα ξεκινήσουμε με τον συνάδελφο κύριο Martínez Carrasco, ο οποίος είναι επιμελητής του Πανεπιστημίου της Κόρδοβας και μέλος του Κέντρου Βυζαντινών, Νεοελληνικών και Κυπριακών Σπουδών του Πανεπιστημίου της Γρανάδας, ο οποίος θα μας παρουσιάσει το θέμα Constantinople from the Martínez, the city of Benjamin the Tudela and Abu Hamid Algharnati. Ο κύριος Matilde Casas μπορεί να ανέλθει στο βήμα και να λάβει το λόγο.
Καλημέρα. Πριν να αρχίσω, θα ήθελα να σας ευχαριστήσω για την πρόσκληση στο συνέδριο. Και τώρα αρχίσω με την παρουσία στα αγγλικά. Δεν μπορώ να το κάνω στα ελληνικά, συγγνώμη. Looking at and narrating what is looked at from the margin does not necessarily imply doing so from a subaltern stance, but rather assuming a critical viewpoint, aware of one's own identity. Each detail creating a narrative from the outside that leads us to a periphery-centered dialectic in which both planes are shown on an equal footing, in which the prejudices of those who observe are projected. In this case, the gaze belongs to a Jew, Sephardi, and a Muslim, an Andalusian, both from the Iberian Peninsula, which gives a special character to the way they interpret that they see in Constantinople. They don't belong to the Christian tradition, nor do they belong to the countries that in the 12th century had direct relation with the Byzantine Empire. Approaching the account of the travel of Benjamin of Tudela, Tudela is a city in the Kingdom of Navarra, and Abu Hamid Algharnati, a Granadian, require of us as a reader and interpreters the effort to put aside our 21st century mentality and think of the world as a people to whom the world can still surprise them because they know still have a place. Such narratives used to be peppered with anecdotes and description that today might as wince at obvious exaggeration or invention. Nevertheless, the word that served as a basis for this work could not be more different in style and in the author's intention, because they don't always seek to convey a reliable account. Abu Hamid's work is a product of the Arabic literature of his time. The very title of the work, Tuhfa al-Albab, Gifts of the Spirits, is more poetic than informative. It is difficult to get an idea of its content from the title. Reading it, one would think that it is a work of Neoplatonic theology or something like that. But this is not an exclusive characteristic of all authors. It's repeated on different occasions. Perhaps the best known is that of Al-Masudi and his Muruj al-Dahab, the Middle of Gold, which is not a compendium of geology or mining, but one of the most important historiographical and geographical works of classical Islam. Benjamin of Tudela does not lend himself to such literary games, and his Sefer HaMasaot is what it claims to be, a travel book. There is no artifice, but there is an important aspect to bear in mind when assessing the style and veracity of its content, related to the way in which the text has been preserved and transmitted. What we know as Sefer HaMasaot is not the narrative that came directly from the columns of Benjamin Bar Johan of Tudela. It's rather the composition that a copy is made on the notes left by the traveler. There are no major additions by someone else's hand beyond the prologue, in which some information about the author is given. In respect, Benjamin's annotation through this I was told, that I did not see personally, which give the Jewish traveler's account an air of honesty, although some modern scholars have cast doubt on parts of the account. Reading it carefully, these doubts are dispelled. It is a dry style, without being carried away by the wonders told to him by the people of the place he visits. In that respect, it's very much like the narrative of the 5th century Spanish pilgrim Egeria, for whom sentient miracles were merely exaggeration to deceive tourists. As others before me have noted, the Sefer has certain memorandum-like features. At times it reads like the report of a clerk giving an account of a business trip that lasted from 1165 to 1173. For although it's not clearly stated anywhere in the text, everything seems to indicate that the reason for the departure was of a commercial nature. If it had only been a pilgrimage, the route from Navarre would have been another, much more direct route to the Holy Land. Naturally, the religious aspect can be separated, especially when the object of his account is the Jewish communities he encounters on his journey. From Jewry to Jewry, because despite the distance or the fact that they were among people of different cultures or religions, Jews are often afflicted by the same problems, thus derived from being a minority. What worried Arabic in Tudela was similar to what worried Arabic in Alexandria, Montpellier, Constantinople, or Venice. Something of that underlies Algharnati's account. 13, religious impulse. It fulfills the Quranic injunction to go out into the world and contemplate the wonders of the Allah creation. But at the same time, he reflects what we have already seen in Benjamin of Tudela, concerned to his Muslim brothers, where they are minority. Abu Hamid does not seem to be a merchant, and what drives him to travel is not a commercial interest, but of a different nature. It's presented as a journey in search of knowledge that at times seems more like an exile, flying from the same extremists who forced Maimonides to seek refuge in Mamluk Egypt. But that is another story. The two surviving works by the traveler from Granada that don't provide any information about his profession. Some have suggested that he might have been a man rich enough to spend 90 years he lived going from one place to another. The truth is that the opposite was true. When he sat down to write his travel memoir in Mosul, he does so at the behest of a third, an important sheikh who paid him. The Andalusian traveler lied off his knowledge. He is someone who has been trained along the way and set that knowledge, wherever it is needed. His clients are usually those Islamic communities on the margin of Islam who live among Christian or pagans, such as in Bulgaria, on the shore of the Caspian Sea, or in Bashkir, Hungary, and who are not very clear about Orthodox jurisprudence or custom. There will always be someone to pay for his teachings or the marvelous account of his adventures. Abu Hamid's intelligence and charisma made him an advisor to the Magyar king, whom we can identify with Bela II or Gesa II. This is most likely given that the Grenadian was in Hungarian territory between 1131 and 1154, albeit intermittently. And if we take into account his own account of the in the Tudela, we are inclined to think of Gesa II, a child when he ascended the throne, and a tense relation with the Byzantine ruled by Manuel Comneno. He became the representative of the Muslim minority in the service of the Magyars. His curiosity about the city of Constantinople dates from this period. Everything he tells about the capital of the empire belongs to the imagined geography. Algharnati is sincere and warns that everything he writes about Rumiya and Uthman is hearsay because he has never set foot in it. But before proceeding further, we must note the particularity of this fragment. The description of Rumiya is only found in the Alger manuscript, not in those kept in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. Its style is different from the rest of the work, and if it were a new and expanded edition. There is also no scholarly consensus on its identification with Constantinople, many favoring either wrong or deliberated confusion between the two by Abu Hamid, the most plausible option. The city he describes has a perimeter of 20 parasangas, or about 12.5 kilometers, and it's surrounded by 8 high stone walls. He said that it is accessible from one side, the land wall, because the other two face the sea. In short, he has described Constantinople's position on the Bosphorus Triangle. It's very similar to the data recorded by Benjamin of Tudela in Sefer HaMasaot, a city divided between the sea and the land with 18 miles on each side, equivalent to approximately 26.5 kilometers. Furthermore, it is located on two arms of the sea, one coming from Sephara, the Mediterranean, and the other from Russia, the Black Sea. The measurement differs from one to the other, but both coincide in emphasizing an amphibious character of the city. Both travelers play with the symbolism of Constantinople, which is transferred to the way in which both refer to it and the element of urbanism they emphasize. The Sephardi continue the tradition of considering the Byzantine capital as one of the two pillars on which the world stood. The only city with which it could be compared was Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. Together, they were the two eyes of the world, a designation born in late antiquity. Abu Hamid's vision is entirely fanciful from the moment he claims that Constantinople was built by the jinn as a gift to the King Solomon. The city he describes is a prodigy of magical engineering, born of a clearing. Most marvelous of all is the river of copper that surrounding it, 40 cubits wide and 2 cubits thick. For many, this fanciful description is a reference to the Golden Horn. If so, the river that runs through the city between 2 rows of copper columns will be the Mes, Constantinople's main street. Whether alluding to real space or not, what seems clear to me is the connection between the Queen of City and the mythical city of copper, the one that Musa ibn Nusayr, the Spanish conqueror, troops were unable to take. I think it's not likely that a learned Muslim man would draw a parallel between the two enclaves. For Islamic eschatology, Constantinople had a special place. It was linked to the Prophet, and the sect held that the triumph of Islam would not come until the green flag flew over its wall. In the imagery developed by Abu Hamid, both are protected by the magic attributed to Solomon and his ability to bring the spirits and make them work at his command. But if there is one place that attracts the interest of anyone who comes to Constantinople, it is Hagia Sophia. And neither Benjamin of Tudela nor Abu Hamid Algharnati will pass up the opportunity to mention it in their accounts. The Sephardic traveler is surprising that the temple has as many altars as there are days in a year. A count that will depend on whether we take the Christian solar year or the Jewish and Muslim lunar year as a reference. The Andalusian does not forget this quantifying aspect either, and tries to surprise readers, listeners, with the enormous dimension of the building. 1,000 cubits high by 500 cubits wide, surrounded by 400 golden towers, each 100 cubits high. Clearly an exaggeration, whose sole purpose is to quench the thirst for excitement of both popular classes and the elites. This idea of wealth and magnificence is reinforced by Benjamin's claim that the church served as a storehouse for the tribute that came annually to Constantinople. Of the place of provenance, he highlights the 2 islands. He does not say which one, but they were easy to identify, Crete and Cyprus. Both functioned as a fortress on the maritime frontier, and the later, Cyprus in particular, had been shaken by the presence of in the east of the King John founded as a result of the First Crusade. If we compare this part of Sefer HaMasa'ot with that devoted to Rome, we see the distance that separated the 2 spheres of Christendom, the abysmal difference in progress and wealth between Byzantium and the Latin West, despite the fact that the historiography has traditionally presented the 12th century as the century of our Western Renaissance and an Eastern crisis and decadence. It's not here that I will bring out our Eurocentric prejudices. Another aspect on which they both agree is to emphasize Constantinople's status as a large market. The market are spread throughout the city and are a source of great bustle. Merchants from all over the known world used to meet in its street regardless of their religion. Yesterday, as today, money had no God. So it was not unusual to see people from Babylon or Persia, Egypt or Sinai, Lombardy or Spain. More surprising of all, in their stalls, they sold all kinds of goods and foodstuff, fruits, bread, melons, the most varied sweets and dried fruits. To conclude this presentation, I would like to focus on the function of the urban space of Constantinople as a stage for the state of political and religious power, a liturgy in which each social body had its assigned role. Benjamin of Tudela directly and Abu Hamid through the account they give him are both witness to the imperial ceremonies. The hippodrome has a place in the page of the Sefer, although what he tells about this space is a curious mixture of imagination and reality. It is said that it was a building attached to the Great Palace, but so much for the hints of reality. To a large extent, what Benjamin does is to embellish his account with what he thought must have been the spectacle in the hippodrome, much closer to the spectacle in the classical Roman amphitheater in the Colosseum of Rome. As a Christian city par excellence, bloody spectacle never took place in the most representative space of Constantinople, much less on the day of Nativity. In the time of Manuel Comnenus, the hippodrome was the scene of tournament in the best French and English chivalry tradition, of which the emperor was an enthusiastic admirer. The Tukhfa gives an account of striking or not so striking ritual whenever the emperor went out, accompanied by his servant, he distributed a large amount of gold among the inhabitants of the city. The reason Abu Hamid gives for this behavior is the need for the populace to stand aside to make way for the imperial regime. What he is depicting is a distribution of arms by the emperor and his court, a way of showing the inhabitants of Constantinople that he cared for them as if he were their father. We might even think that it corresponds to the moment of the coronation of Manuel Comnenus in 1143. In the description, we have briefly analyzed here the idea of wealth, pomp, and luxury that surround everything related to the Eastern Empire in general and Constantinople in particular stand out. Despite the otherness represented by all two travelers because of their religious condition, the one a Jew, the other Muslim, their geographical origin, both Westerners, their views of Byzantium and Byzantine affairs are not free of what century later will be called Orientalism. Everything that has to do with this part of the Mediterranean, the empire, is presented under the halo of Asian luxury and a dreamlike and real atmosphere that heralds the stereotypes of the city of the Bosphorus and its culture. Thank you very much for your attention. Aristotle.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε ιδιαίτερα τον αγαπητό συνάδελφο, τον κύριο Μαρτίνες Καράσκο, για την πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα παρουσίαση του έργου δύο σημαντικών περιηγητών ταξιδιωτών, του Βενιαμίν από την Τουδέλη και του Αμπού Χαμίδ Αλγαρνάτη, που επισκέφθηκαν την Κωνσταντινούπολη και μας έχουν δώσει πολύ σημαντικές πληροφορίες στο έργο τους. Νομίζω η συζήτηση θα κάνουμε στο τέλος για όλες τις εισηγήσεις. Επομένως, κύριε συνάδελφε, μπορείτε να καθίσετε. Θα παρακαλέσω μόνο αν θέλετε να είστε κάπου εδώ μπροστά, ίσως οι εισηγητές, για να μπορέσουμε στη συνέχεια στη συζήτηση να διευκολυνθούμε. Και τώρα θα καλέσω στο βήμα την συνάδελφο κυρία Ματίλντε Κάζας Ολέα, αναπληρώτρια καθηγήτρια του Πανεπιστημίου της Γρανάδας και μέλος επίσης του Κέντρου Βυζαντινών, Νεοελληνικών και Κυπριακών Σπουδών του Πανεπιστημίου της Γρανάδας, για να μας μιλήσει με θέμα The mosaics of the Church of the Holy Apostles, ekphrastic techniques in description of images of Constantine of Rhodes. Θα μας παρουσιάσει ένα πολύ ενδιαφέρον θέμα που αφορά στην διακόσμηση, την ψηφιδωτή διακόσμηση αυτής της σπουδαίας Εκκλησίας του Ναού των Αγίων Αποστόλων μέσα από την περιγραφή που μας έχει αφήσει η έκφραση του Κωνσταντίνου του Ροδίου τον 10ο αιώνα. Κύριε συνάδελφε, έχετε τον λόγο.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. First, I would like to thank the Istituto Hellenico di Studi Bizantini e Post-Byzantini di Venezia for his invitation and welcome, and to express that I hope this symposium will be the beginning of a long and fruitful relationship. In this paper, I will talk about the classes known as Stichi Constantino Asikriti to Rodiu, that consists of 981 dodecasyllabic verses ascribed to the authorship of Constantine of Rhodes, a poet who lived in the 9th and 10th centuries, and as the title says, served as a secretary of the court of Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus. The classic survives in an unfinished form in an unique manuscript, Athos Laura, 1161, which perhaps would have been a draft. The poem consists of two sections: a first description of the 7 wonders of Constantinople, and a second description of the Church of the Holy Apostle, now lost, as you all know. The structure of the poem consists of first a dedication poem to the Emperor Constantine VII, who had commissioned the work, then an account of monuments and statues in Constantinople. 7 of these monuments are highlighted as wonders, 2 more than 7 are described. First, column and statue of Justinian. Second, porphyry column of Constantine I. 3, house of Senate, where there are bronze gates, and statue of Athena from Lindos. 4th, column of the cross, then an immodule, column and statue of Theodosius I, and column of Arcadius or the Xerolophos in the form of Arcadius. After, we have 3 transitional passages and a poem to the account of the Holy Apostles. In verses from 437 to 981, we have an account of the church of the Holy Apostles. In the accounts, Constantine talks about his history, architecture, and his decoration with a focus on mosaics with scenes from the life of Christ. The Constantine's Ecphrasis is considered as an inventory of architectural elements according to the encyclopedic spirit of the time. The analysis of the work in its literary context shows that the poem is a result of a labor of selection and application of the principles and techniques of ekphrasis, which can be found well integrated into the rhetorical exercises in the school curriculum. However, Constantine's poetic style is usually considered poor, artificial, and incoherent, a catalogue of elements rather than an emotional perception of works of art. The last part of the ekphrasis contains an account of 12 mosaics of the church. The Ascension, Annunciation, yes, Nativity, the coming of the Magi, the presentation in the temple, the baptism, the transfiguration, resurrection of the widow's son, the raising of Lazarus, the entry into Jerusalem, the betrayal of Judas, and the crucifixion. These mosaics have hardly been dealt in detail in the other sources on the church, except for the description of Nicolaus Mesarites in the 12th century. Procopius in Buildings 1 did not give any details of how Justinian's church was decorated. In the Theophanes Continuatus 580, only an imprecise mention is made on the restoration of the church by Basil I. The description of Mesarites differs greatly from that of Constantine. In fact, most of the academic works on the mosaic of the church try to establish a chronology of their production and restoration and the differences that are very most between both physical description. The aim of this paper is to analyze the Constantine's account of the mosaics as literary products within the rhetorical tradition of ekphrasis and to understand both contexts of composition and reception. The whole poem, as the poem indicates, is dedicated to the Emperor Constantine Porphyrogenitos as a crown of roses woven by inspiration of the Muses, evoking Euripides' tragedy Hippolytus. It is not known if poem was written for a specific event or if its audience was someone older than Constantine VII and his family. As it is usual in Byzantine context, the ekphrasis is addressed to the emperor and is included in the Basiliki Logi, also within the epidictic rhetorical or genus epidicticon and the encomium. However, it is clear that the audience was familiar with the city and the church. The author conceives the poem as a splendid and pleasing gift composed in the sweetest lines of yams for its oral performance and in the environment of the court and with a commentatory and encomiastic purpose. The poem was not written to give an objective, detailed or technical description of the subject. Rather, ekphrasis as a rhetorical technique served to bring to its audience a vivid depiction of the subject and to emphasize perceptual and spiritual understanding. Ekphrasis was not a description, but a verbal representation of the subject that transfers its spiritual and significance to an audience. At the same time, the poet includes a third accent in his composition, the architects and painters of the construction. He establishes a parallelism in his role as author of verses with architects and painters as authors of architectural and pictorial works. In this way, the text is built on 3 levels that correspond to the general objective of the work. On the first level, there is the ekphrasis as a verbal and interpretive representation of the work of art shared by the author and his audience, both familiar to the described work. On the second level, the latent story of physical construction and its promoters, architects, and painters. In this case, the poet makes an interpretation of the effect purposed by the artist, when he fulfills the objective of using the poem to extol the magnificence and power of the imperial foundation. The third, deeper level resides in the theological text that underlies each image described. This is the statement of triumphant orthodoxy, the praise of the glory of God through incarnation and resurrection of Christ. These 3 levels are seen in the verses 732 to 15, where Constantine describes a mosaic located in the central dome of the church depicting Christ, apostles, and Virgin together, possibly an ascension similar to the one that survives in San Marco in Venice. In this fragment, in the first level, marked in blue, the poet lists the characters of the pictorial composition, systematically using syncresis, similes, to express a recurring idea of the poem. The church is like the heavenly kingdom of God on earth. Thus, Christ is like the sun, the Virgin like the moon, and the apostles are the stars. The author also returns to the idea that words are not enough to describe the wonder that both he and his audience are contemplating. Thauma, thauma, tos logo pleon. On the second level, marked in red, the author uses third-person singular aorist and all participles to present the story of the construction of the mosaic in an allusion to the architect painter as agent. the semantics of the verbs used, καλύψας, απενδύσας, κατεχρήσωσε, γράψας, offer a physical description of the mosaic. And next, the poet exposes the interpretation of the effect proposed by the artist. He revealed this renowned house as another heavenly dwelling on earth. The third level can be found in the last verses of the fragment in green, which serve as an introduction to the series of mosaics located in the lower part down to the second cornices, whose eschatological meaning is to teach us the abasement of the word laws and his presence among us mortals. That is, kenosis και παρουσία του λόγου. In this part, the poet uses terminology with a deep theological meaning based on St. Paul's epistle of the Philippians on Christ's humility and exaltation, where it is stated that Christ emptied himself by assuming the form of a servant, taking on the likeness of humanity. He died on a cross, and for this reason, God and every tongue highly exalted him. So, as I said above, ekphrasis was not an exhaustive description, but a verbal representation of the work of art and the impression it generates. And this is precisely what the audience expects from the poem. Because of it, the poet carried out a task of selection and ordination of the presented material. This is the methodological way of presentation, the 7 wonders of the city, and then of the chart of apostles, where the author offers a sequential account in the way of periegesis, moving through the building. For the ekphrasis of the mosaic, it seems that the author chooses an order consistent with the evangelical account of the life, passion, and death of Christ. Possibly there was also a task of selection of the images described, but this cannot be confined as the poem is unfinished, despite the testimony of Mesarites, which includes 18 mosaics compared to the 12 of Constantine. The author concises his own representation of the mosaics not as a complete and static image of each scene, but as a result of the choice of details and allusive material, which is designed as wonder, and with which he intends to arouse emotion in an audience who knows well the textual background. For example, the ekphrasis of the third mosaic about the coming of the Magi is limited to a static statement in first 2 verses, which have the function of titulum or didaskalia, proskinesis of the Magi. The poem follows the text of the Gospel of Matthew in the identification of the Magi, wise men, although he substitutes the indefinite Idou Magi apo Anatolon of the Gospel for Persia. Then the author chooses to focus on the star that guides the Magi, actually a detail of the image, but very relevant for interpretation, since it points the place of the Christ child. From here, Constantine introduced a commentary aimed at extolling the role of Christ as the King of Israel, great God, Basileus Israel, Theos Megas, perhaps inspired by the question of the Magi in Gospel, Matthew 2:2, who estin o texis Basileus tom Iudeon. The development of the verses can be connected with the Gospel text, in which there is a direct allusion to the prophets. However, while the Gospel of Matthew uses a quote from Micheas, Constantine directly mentions the prophet Balaam. The choice of Constantine makes sense, since while Micheas' prophecy refers to the birth of the king of Israel in Bethlehem of Judah, Balaam's prophecy speaks about the guiding star in number 24:17. Constantine's deviation in his description is due to the focus of the star as a fundamental compositional element of the mosaic. On the other hand, it is a frequent practice in Constantine's ekphrasis to make an interpretation of each scene through the technique of anticipation. What sense does each human act of Christ have for his final exaltation? In this case, the anticipation is activated by the words of the prophets. Constantine combines the technique of anticipation for the interpretation of the scene with the ekphrasis technique of enalia, that is, vividness through the word. To do this, he appeals to the imagination of the audience and to the collective memory, putting speech into the mouths of the protagonists of the mosaics. It does this in varying degrees of involvement. For example, the ekphrasis of the five scene describe the mosaic of the baptism. The starting point is the hands of the Prodromos. Then author places the scene in the Jordan River and mentions the Father and the Holy Spirit in the form of a dove standing the image with an epithet and a pleonasm. The second element of ekphrasis is the voice of God, phonis anothen patros. From here, the author moves his audience from the image to the word in a kind of movement of synesthesia in which he reproduces the divine discourse in indirect style. The author reproduces the intervention of the gospel, by means of expanded paraphrases from the verse 798 in italic. Yes. Thus, the ekphrasis, the ekphrasis should have the virtues of enalia, saphinia, clarity and brevity, and relaxed style, but it is also an open and complex genre which admits the combination with other rhetorical genders. Thus, the introduction of the speech of the characters in the description of mosaics, whether in a direct or indirect style, is a form of ethopia. The poet uses the rhetoric gender of vilification, invective, psogos, frequent in Byzantine epidictic speech for the mosaic of the betrayal of Judas. That is a good example of prosopography, please. The next prosopography in the description of the raising of Lazarus. Here, the ekphrasis focuses on Lazarus and his physical appearance, unlike the Gospel of John that gives prominence to Mary and Martha. Constantine maintains the data of the 4 days, the Tetraimeron, already dead when the miracle takes place, and is much more prolix in the description of the decomposition of the corpse. His purulent corpse altogether changed, disfigured by scars and wounds, hands and feet bound fast together and shrouded by grave clothes. The reference in the Gospel is more subtle. Martha warns Christ that the corpse already smells. The image of resurrected Lazarus, who runs like a gazelle, Dorcado seeking back to life, is in the homily on Lazarus of Barexicius of Alexandria. This miracle returns to the theme of resurrection and triumph over death. In conclusion, Constantine's account is not strictly close to that of the Gospels, as he chose to add and omit details throughout to change words and emphasis. It may also be suggested that it is almost irrelevant to both poet and audience what the image looked like. What mattered was what it means. Constantine's scenes provide the essential of what he wished to convey with a weight of theological emphasis. throughout what we describe as an account of the mosaics of the Holy Apostles, Constantine did not tell his audience what they could see in the scenes. They could do that for themselves. Rather, he put into words how they should perceive and understand these scenes. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Και εμείς σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ για αυτήν την πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα εισήγηση για το σπουδαίο αυτό μνημείο της Κωνσταντινούπολης, των Ναών των Αγίων Αποστόλων και την παρουσίαση των λογοτεχνικών στοιχείων, των θεολογικών εξαρτήσεων και μη της ελευθερίας που έστειλε ο Κωνσταντίνος ο Ρόδιος στην περιγραφή των σκηνών. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Στη συνέχεια ακολουθεί η τρίτη εισήγηση από τον αγαπητό συνάδελφο κύριο Φρέντερικ Λόριτσεν, ο οποίος δυστυχώς δεν κατέστη δυνατόν να είναι σήμερα εδώ μαζί μας, αλλά μας έχει αποστείλει την εισήγησή του βιντεοσκοπημένη και θα μπορέσουμε να την παρακολουθήσουμε. Ο κύριος Λόριτσεν είναι πάρα πολύ γνωστός, βυζαντινολόγος, ιστορικός της Σχόλα Γκράντε του Αγίου Μάρκου, εδώ στη Βενετία, και το θέμα της συζήτησης του είναι Praising the Unconquered Trebizond from Ancient Greek Colony to Empire on the Black Sea.
Hello, I'd like to thank Professor Koukoussas and the organizing committee for inviting me today to speak about Ekphrasis and specifically about the city of Trebizond, a topic which I'm particularly interested in. Trebizond was arguably the most important city of the Black Sea. Bessarion wrote one of his most significant descriptions since he was born in the city and his audience was also local. Scholars have explored it as a literary praise of the city and as a historical source. The text has not often been studied for its political value, even though Bessarion claims that Trebizond was politically the most important Greek-speaking city. The Empire of Trebizond was established in 1204 and lasted until 1261. It was ruled by the great Komneni. Indeed, while Constantinople was ruled by the Palaeologus family, Trebizond's rulers descended from Andronicus I, Komnenos, the Byzantine emperor, who ruled from 1183 to 1185. Bessarion contrasts the incompetence of other ruling families with the God-given Komneni. And here I quote, "But God stretched out his hand from on high, took pity on us, and made the Komnenos clan our emperors, through them restoring the prosperity of our people, reversing our defeat, and restoring what we had lost. At once, then he appointed as a general Alexios, the best and most noble of men, who was prized for his virtue and all that had been accomplished for the empire, and subsequently he established Alexios's truly golden lineage over the Romans." This statement is rather insulting to other Byzantine ruling dynasties, Constantinople and Mistras. It is not suitable in the period after the alliance established between Constantinople and Trebizond in 1427, when John VIII Palaeologus married Maria, the daughter of the emperor of Trebizond, Alexios IV Megas Komnenos. It is also in contrast with Bessarion's departure from Trebizond after 1423. It would appear that Bessarion is writing for Alexios IV Grand Komnenos, since he says Alexios is the greatest name for an emperor. And I quote, "And Alexios, we find this the most pleasing name of all for an emperor, was thus the first emperor of this land, Trebizond, and the source of all our blessings. If the name Alexios is that of the current ruler, then the description of Trebizond was written during the reign of Alexios IV Megas Komnenos, 1417-1429. Professor Ilias Gerenis has already pointed that the encomium was written during this reign. The encomium endorses the Megali Komneni and, according to this dating, praises Alexios IV Megas Komnenos. Bessarion's only surviving imperial encomium was dedicated to this very same emperor. Such a date apparently contradicts the only internal chronological evidence. Bessarion says 1,500 years have passed since Trebizond became Roman. He also says that the city became Roman after the triumph of Pompey. And this is in paragraph 74. The triumph of Pompey occurred on his birthday on the 29th of September 61 BC. If one adds 1,500 to 61 BC, one obtains 1439. Bessarion was in Italy at this time. However, the speech was addressed to an audience in Trebizond. One must remember that in the Greek, before the word 1,500 is the particle pros, the preposition pros, which means approximately. That detail gives us only one certainty, that the text was not written in 1439, but at some other date. Otherwise, it would have said precisely. The political nature of the encomium of Trebizond reveals it was probably composed around 1421, 1423. The structure of the imperial encomium is prescribed by Menander Rhetor, as is the description of cities. In this manual, he indicates that the ruler is praised by virtues revealed in his actions. Bessarion employs the encomium of the city of Trebizond to praise the ruler, as one may gather from the structure of the encomium of Trebizond. And here I use the outline established by John Monfazani. Before the praise of the individual buildings, there is a praise of the dynasty of the Megali Komneni in section 90 to 97. The next section is the buildings and walls of the city. The next paragraphs, which describe the city, are remarkable since they're governed by a plural subject. The subject is the pateres imon, our fathers, or better, our ancestors. The use of the term us to refer to the people in Trebizond is also characteristic of section 120, 110, 121. Moreover, our forefathers is a reference to the Megali Komneni and the works of construction of the city. The verb diorisanto is also a technical term for an imperial decision. The imperial family decides to embellish and improve the city. The city described in paragraphs 98 to 110 and is described simply as a manifestation of imperial virtue, as is typical of a Vasilikos Logos, according to the prescription of Menander Rhetor. It is impossible to separate the city from its rulers. Moreover, the emperor is chosen and sent by God. And here I quote, "As for our city, however, a city would appear to be truly supported by some divine lot, and that has been the work of divinely inspired men. The multitude of years has not obscured it, nor has the great length of time dulled it." This statement precedes a long historical excursus, paragraphs 12 to 89, aimed at indicating the unique characteristic of Trebizond. It was never conquered by foreigners. Bessarion describes Trebizond as invincible. Quote, "Our city came into being from non-existence, and once in existence has not ceased to exist. The first attribute it shares with other cities, the second with very few." This paragraph, which vaguely echoes the city's comparison of the ruins of Sparta and Athens, points out that the unique characteristic of Trebizond is that it has never been conquered. It is worth remembering that in the Byzantine sphere of influence, Bessarion is placing Trebizond above Constantinople and Mistras. The first had been conquered and occupied in 1204 by the Latins during the Fourth Crusade. The latter had been established by Villard-Douin in 1205. Such a statement would please the local audience and would anger other Greek speakers. Bessarion was not only says that Trebizond was not conquered, but explained which foreigners had attacked and conquered previously Byzantine lands. I quote, "The barbarians overran all of Asia and ravaged its beauties fiercely, with no one standing in the way. They turned everything into a proverbial Scythian wilderness, and their innate avarice knew no bounds. They destroyed everything in succession as far as Chalcedon itself and the land opposite Byzantium, and they did not halt their forward advance until they reached the sea." Unquote. Bessarion points out Arabs and Turks and singles out the capture of the 11th century Byzantine Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. He also lists various populations which had attacked Byzantine lands: Scythians, Huns, Pechenegs, Turks, and Arabs. He does not mention two of the most important populations, the Ak-Koyunlu Turkmens and the Mongols. The main reason is that the speech is about the city and the fact it increased, prospered, and continued. Bessarion is focusing on the fact that there are constant external pressures. Constantinople and Mistras had been overcome by these. Trebizond instead was an ally of the Ak-Koyunlu Turkmen. Their capital was Diyarbakir in this period, 1403, 1468. And therefore rather distant. Both Trebizond and the Ak-Koyunlu Confederation were subjects of the Mongol Empire. The Mongols had dealt a crushing defeat to the Ottoman Empire in 1402 at the Battle of Ankara. It was not just the Ottomans who were defeated by the Byzantines as well, who were technically vassals to the Ottomans. The defeat was so important that the Byzantine Empire and Despotate of Achaia, Mistras, stopped paying tribute in 1403 and then resumed in 1422. The Empire of Trebizond technically became an enemy of the Byzantine Empire and the Despotate of Morea in 1422. This explains the harsh tone of Bessarion. He singles out Trebizond and the Grand Comneni as God-protected, since they represented the only Greek-speaking state within the larger alliance of Mongol states. It also explains the focus on Trebizond and the encomium. It is a great city of the Asian expanse, the area subject to the Mongols. And here I quote rather long passage, but very important, which you can see on the screen. If I must something concern centrality, then I would not say that Trebizond is at the center of an Attica or Greece, a minor region and a small land measured in small distances and bounded by narrow boundaries. Instead, I would say it lies at the center of a vast expanse of Asia, so to speak, as well as of the people and cities of Asia. For the Persian, Medes, Sabiri, and the people of Colchis live near our eastern border, while Cappadocians, Cilicians, Galatians, and Lydians surround us to the west. It is as if they form a bodyguard around us and swirl around us in a harmonious dance, as if in a circle. They crown us with virtues and goods that each of their lands produce, while they receive what we produce and collect it in both hands. So the expression goes, though they lack more than they receive. By itself, our city is no less robust than any other in terms of what it produces and grows, but by accepting their products, it has become the world's common storehouse and workshop, a sea of bounties, as they say, unquote. Bessarion presents Trebizond as an Asian city. It was subject to the Mongols and allied with the Akkoyunlu Turkmens. Indeed, Alexios IV Megas Komnenos had married his daughter to one of the Akkoyunlu Turkmens in 1422. Moreover, Trebizond was allied at the time with Isfendiyar Bey, ruler of Jandaroglu Beylik, 1385-1440, whose main city was Sinop. Bessarion describes the city in paragraphs 24 to 28 of the present document. He also claims that Sinope is only second to Trebizond. One should remember that the Beylik was at war with the Ottomans and effectively an ally of the Empire of Trebizond, with which it neighbored to, it was on the west of the empire. These elements allow one to narrow down the dating of the encomium to Trebizond. The post-quem is 1421 with the accession of the Ottoman Sultan Murad II, which began, and he ruled from 1421 to 1444, and then again 1446, 1451, which marked the end of the Ottoman interregnum and had begun with the disastrous Battle of Ankara in 1402. Given the criticism of Constantinople and Mistras, the antequem is the wedding of John VIII Palaeologus with the Princess of Trebizond in 427. This wedding signaled an anti-Ottoman alliance between Trebizond and Constantinople. Bessarion's encomium to Alexios IV Megas Komnenos was recited on this occasion, the occasion of the wedding. So this is the encomium to the Emperor Alexios IV. He claims that Alexios is naturally an imperial name in his encomium to Trebizond, thus confirming that the speech was written under the reign of Alexios IV Megas Komnenos. Bessarion became a monk in 1423 and apparently left Trebizond after that date. This would narrow the date of the text to between 1421 and 1423. One may add a curious detail. The Venetian Senate elevated a certain Biagio to Archbishop of Trebizond in 1419, indicating an increased presence of Venice in the area of Trebizond, which had previously been more closely connected with Genova. This is the time of the first direct contact between Venice and Bessarion other than Venetian merchants. One of the last is probably one of the most curious and connected to this encomium. The granddaughter of Alexios IV Megas Komnenos married Uzun Hasan, leader of the Akkoyunlu. Moreover, his mother descended from the sister of Alexios III Grand Komnenos. So he was related in two ways to the Megali Komneni of Trebizond. However, the Empire of Trebizond and the Akkoyunlu had been allies, as this paper has indicated. However, Venice showed great interest in Uzun Hasan in 1463, just after the fall of Trebizond. Bessarion promoted the city of Trebizond as a practical manifestation of the virtues of the Grand Komneni. He also indicated that they were appointed by God. Bessarion argued that the city, Trebizond, was invincible and God-protected, unlike Mistra or Constantinople. Thank you very much.
Ευχαριστώ.